There are 13 specific observable signs that your presence affects a room before you say a single word. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to check off exactly how many of them apply to you. Picture the exact moment a room shifts when someone walks in. Conversations don't stop, but they soften. People sit up half an inch straighter without deciding to, and nobody could tell you why. That's not luck, and it's not charisma in the way most people think about charisma. It's something quieter and stranger, and later I'll show you why the people who try hardest to prove they have this quality are almost always the ones who kill it stone dead the moment they try. But first, if you've ever walked into a room and felt the temperature change before anyone said a word to you, type shift in the comments right now, because you already know exactly what this video is about. You felt it and dismissed it 100 times. You walk into a meeting and the small talk that was happening a second ago quietly trails off, not because anyone's afraid of you, but because something in the air adjusted. You've had strangers apologize to you for things that didn't need an apology, as if your presence alone raised the stakes of the moment. You've watched people who barely know you go out of their way to explain themselves to you unprompted, the way you'd explain yourself to someone whose opinion mattered even when it shouldn't. And you've paid a price for it. 2 friendships that cooled for no clear reason, rooms where you felt like you had to shrink on purpose just to make everyone else comfortable. A low hum of loneliness that comes from being read as intense or a lot by people who never bothered to actually know you. You've spent energy managing other people's discomfort with something you didn't even choose to have. Think about the last group photo you were in. Everyone's told to say cheese, and you notice half a beat later that people arranged themselves around you without discussing it, not literally shoved you to the center. Nothing that obvious, but somehow the group photo settled into a shape with you as its anchor point anyway. Or think about the last time you gave an honest, unfiltered opinion in a meeting calmly, without raising your voice, and watched the entire tone of the room shift afterward, as if you'd said something far more dramatic than you actually had. You didn't do anything unusual. You just didn't do what everyone else in the room reflexively does: hedge, soften, apologize in advance for having an opinion at all, and the absence of that hedging read to everyone else as something almost startling. Marcus Aurelius, writing private notes to himself that he never intended anyone else to read, kept circling back to a similar tension: the gap between what other people project onto you and what you actually are, and how much of your peace gets sacrificed trying to close that gap for them instead of just letting it exist. He wasn't writing about auras. He was writing about exactly this: the exhausting work of being misread and the freedom that shows up the moment you stop trying to correct it. Here's the core idea stated plainly: what people are calling aura is not a mystical energy field. It's the observable, measurable effect of an undisturbed person on people who are used to being around disturbed ones. That's it. It's not about crystals, it's not about star signs, and it's not some invisible force radiating out of your chest. It doesn't mean you're better than anyone, more spiritually evolved, or destined for something the rest of the room isn't. What it means is that you've stopped performing certain reflexes. Most people never stop performing the reflex to explain, the reflex to shrink, the reflex to fill silence, the reflex to win, and the absence of those reflexes reads to everyone around you as something unusual, even unsettling. Modern life rewards the opposite. It rewards being loud to be noticed, constantly available to be liked, endlessly explaining yourself to be understood, performing enthusiasm to be included. The thing this video is going to walk you through is the direct opposite of all of that: not doing more to be seen, but doing less on purpose until what's left is undeniable without you ever having to announce it. There's an old distinction worth borrowing here between 2 kinds of presence people chase. There's the loud kind, the person who commands a room by talking the most, taking up the most space, making sure everyone knows they're there. And then there's the quiet kind, the one this video is actually about: the person who commands a room by needing nothing from it, whose stillness somehow registers louder than everyone else's noise. The first kind is exhausting to produce and exhausting to be around. The second kind costs nothing to maintain once it's real, because it was never a performance in the first place. Almost everyone watching this has met both types. Almost everyone remembers which one actually left an impression a week later. Sign number 1. And it's the most obvious one, the one you've probably already noticed without naming it. Rooms go quiet when you walk in, even slightly, even for a second. Think about the last time you joined a group conversation already in progress, maybe at a family gathering, maybe in a break room, and there was that half-second pause before anyone acknowledged you, a beat where the energy recalibrated around your arrival before words caught up. Psychologists call the underlying mechanism here sin slicing. Humans are remarkably fast and remarkably accurate at reading a person's presence, posture, and energy in the first few seconds of exposure, often before any conscious reasoning kicks in. You're not imagining the pause. Other people's nervous systems are doing rapid unconscious math on how to calibrate to you, and that takes a half-second longer than continuing whatever they were already doing. The reframe here matters. This isn't you being too much. It's other people's instinctive recognition that something in the room just changed, and that recognition is involuntary. You didn't cause it on purpose, and you don't owe anyone an apology for it. The action today is simple. The next time you feel that pause when you enter a room, resist the urge to fill it with an apology or a joke to relieve the tension. Let the half-second exist. It's not a problem to fix. There's a version of this sign that shows up specifically online too. Worth naming because it surprises people. You post something ordinary, a photo, an update, nothing engineered for attention, and it gets read as more significant than you intended, more scrutinized, more commented on than posts from people who post far more dramatic things far more often. That's the same mechanism at a distance. People are still doing rapid unconscious calibration even through a screen, even without your voice or your posture in the room. Because something about the way you present yourself, even in a caption, doesn't match the noisy, approval-seeking pattern they're used to filtering out automatically. Sign number 2. You've stopped needing people to validate the things you already know are true about yourself. Think about the last compliment someone gave you that you neither fished for nor deflected. You just said thank you and let it land without needing 3 more compliments to confirm the first one was real. There's a well-documented framework in psychology called self-determination theory, which distinguishes between people who are driven by external validation, approval, praise, likes, and people whose motivation comes from an internal, stable sense of their own competence and values. People operating from the internal source need dramatically less external fuel to keep going, and that self-sufficiency is visible to everyone around them, whether they can name it or not. Epictetus built almost his entire philosophy on a similar distinction. Some things are within your control, and other people's opinions of you were never one of them. So building your peace on top of their approval was always building on borrowed ground. The reframe: you're not arrogant for not needing the validation loop most people run on. You've just stopped outsourcing your sense of self to an audience that was never qualified to grade it. The action today: the next time you do something well, notice the urge to seek confirmation and practice letting the accomplishment be complete on its own, with no audience required. It helps to notice how this shows up in the smallest, least glamorous moments, because that's where the habit actually gets built or broken. It's not the big wins where this gets tested. Everyone can feel satisfied privately after landing the big promotion. It's the small ones. Cooking a meal you're genuinely proud of and not photographing it. Solving a problem at work quietly and not mentioning it in the next meeting just to make sure someone notices. Finishing a hard workout and not needing to post it. Each of those moments is a tiny rehearsal for the same skill, letting something be real without an audience confirming it, and the people who've built genuine self-possession usually built it in exactly these unglamorous, unwitnessed repetitions, not in the big dramatic ones everyone assumes. Here's a question worth sitting with before we go further. When was the last time small talk actually gave you anything back? For most people, the honest answer is rarely, and that's sign number 3. Small talk drains you specifically, while depth doesn't. You can talk for 2 hours with someone about grief, ambition, fear, the things that actually structure a life, and leave more energized than when you started. But 5 minutes of weather and traffic in an elevator leaves you wrung out for the rest of the morning. This isn't social anxiety, and it isn't rudeness. It's a mismatch between the cognitive load. Small talk requires constant scanning for social scripts, constant management of tone, and the low payoff it delivers. Seneca wrote about people who filled their days with what he called useless business, motion that resembled connection without providing any of its substance, and noted that a life full of that kind of noise leaves a person strangely more isolated than a life with fewer, deeper exchanges. The reframe: you are not bad at socializing. You've simply developed an intolerance for performance disguised as connection. And your body tells you the truth about that faster than your manners let you admit it out loud. The action today: the next time you're stuck in small talk, ask one real question: what's actually been on your mind lately? And watch how quickly the exchange either deepens or reveals itself as not worth continuing. There's a specific kind of tiredness this produces that's worth naming because it's different from ordinary social exhaustion. It's not that you dislike people, it's that you can tell almost immediately when a conversation has no flaw to it, when it's going to stay at the surface no matter how long it runs, and something in you resists investing energy into an exchange that was never going anywhere. You've learned to spot the difference within the first 60 seconds. The person asking questions because they actually want the answer versus the person asking questions as a formality while waiting for their turn to talk. You didn't used to notice the difference this clearly. Now you can't unnotice it, and pretending otherwise, sitting through another exchange that both of you know is empty, costs more than it used to. Here's the counterintuitive part worth pausing on, because it explains something confusing about how people respond to you. The same quality that draws some people toward you with almost magnetic intensity will repel others just as strongly, and it's the same mechanism doing both. Sign number 4 is this: you notice you get intense. Devotion from some people and inexplicable coldness from others, often for no clear reason you did anything to earn either reaction. You've had people become instantly, almost uncomfortably loyal to you after a single real conversation. And you've had other people who barely know you keep a strange distance, as if something about you unsettles them before you've even spoken. Social comparison theory, first described by Leon Festinger, explains part of this. People constantly and often unconsciously measure themselves against others, and someone who seems unusually self-possessed becomes an involuntary measuring stick. For people secure in themselves, that measuring stick is inspiring. For people already struggling with their own sense of worth, the same measuring stick feels like an accusation, even though you never said a word to accuse them of anything. Marcus Aurelius warned himself repeatedly not to be surprised or wounded when people responded badly to something in him they hadn't chosen. To feel threatened by expecting otherwise, he said, was like being angry at a fig tree for producing figs. The reframe: the coldness isn't a verdict on your character. It's a mirror reflecting what the other person hasn't resolved in themselves yet, and it was never your job to manage that on their behalf. The action today: name one person whose coldness toward you has quietly bothered you, and consciously release the assumption that it means something is wrong with you. There's a particular version of this that stings more than the rest: watching someone go cold specifically after you help them. You'd expect gratitude to build closeness, and sometimes it does, but sometimes the opposite happens. Being on the receiving end of someone else's steadiness at a moment when they felt least steady themselves becomes uncomfortable evidence of exactly the gap social comparison theory describes. It's not logical, and it's rarely something the other person could even explain if you ask them directly. But it's real, and it's common enough that you shouldn't take it as proof you did something wrong by simply being consistent when they needed you to be. Sign number 5, and this one tends to surprise people the most: you've stopped needing to win arguments. Not because you've gone soft, and not because you don't have strong opinions. You might have stronger opinions than most people in the room, but somewhere along the way, the compulsion to have the last word, to correct every wrong statement, to make sure everyone knows you were right, quietly disappeared. Think about the last disagreement you had, where you simply stated your position once clearly and then let it sit there without chasing the other person's agreement. There's a well-known mechanism at play behind why this used to feel so necessary: cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when someone holds two conflicting ideas like "I'm right" and someone disagrees with me publicly, and the almost compulsive drive to resolve that discomfort by winning, proving, or persuading. People who no longer need to win have simply stopped experiencing that disagreement as a threat to their own identity in the first place. Epictetus made this almost a discipline. He taught that the person who needs to be right in every exchange has quietly handed control of their peace to whoever happens to disagree with them that day. The reframe: letting a disagreement go unresolved isn't losing. It's recognizing that your worth was never actually on the table to begin with. The action today: pick one minor disagreement you'd normally push to win and consciously let it go out loud without needing the other person to concede anything. Notice too how differently this plays out depending on the stakes. Letting go of who's right about a movie is easy for almost everyone. The real test is letting go of who's right about something that actually touches your identity, your parenting, your career choice, your values, without the old flood of defensiveness showing up. That's a much higher bar. And most people who claim they've stopped needing to win have only actually stopped needing to win the low-stakes arguments. The 13 signs in this video get harder to hold on to exactly in proportion to how much is actually on the line, and this one is a useful gut check for how far you've really come versus how far you just assume you have. If you've made it this far into this video, you already think about your own presence differently than most people scrolling past this right now. Most viewers won't get past the halfway mark, and you did. So do one simple thing before we go further. Tap that like button. Not as a favor to me, but because it's the fastest way to make sure the next 8 signs, including the one I teased at the very beginning, the reason trying to prove your aura is powerful is exactly what destroys it, actually reach you when they're ready. That reveal is closer than you think. Let's keep going. Sign number 6. Certain people avoid eye contact with you, specifically, in a way they don't with everyone else in the room. You've probably clocked this without naming it. Someone who talks easily and confidently to everyone else at the table suddenly gets a little clipped, a little glancing when the conversation turns to you. This isn't shyness in the general sense. Research on eye contact and social hierarchy has consistently found that sustained eye contact correlates with perceived dominance and confidence, while gaze aversion often correlates with a felt sense of being outranked or exposed, even in casual social settings where no formal hierarchy exists. People aren't consciously deciding to look away from you. Their nervous system is registering something about your steadiness that theirs hasn't caught up to yet. And looking away is the automatic, unconscious way of managing that gap. Seneca observed that the people most disturbed by someone else's calm are usually the people most disturbed by their own turbulence, and that the discomfort they feel has almost nothing to do with the calm person and everything to do with what that calm exposes in themselves by comparison. The reframe: their avoidance isn't rejection. It's an involuntary flinch from something in you that reflects something unfinished in them. The action today: the next time someone avoids sustained eye contact with you, hold your own gaze steady and warm. Rather than intensifying it or looking away to match their discomfort, you'll be surprised how quickly that changes the exchange. This one is easy to misread as arrogance if you're not careful, so it's worth being precise about the difference. Arrogance stares to dominate. It holds eye contact as a challenge, a way of making someone else look away first. What we're describing here is different. A gaze that isn't trying to win anything, that would be just as comfortable if the other person held it back with equal steadiness. The people who avoid it aren't avoiding aggression. They're avoiding a kind of transparency they're not used to being met with, a look that isn't performing anything, isn't hiding anything, and isn't asking anything of them in return. Sign number 7 takes this a level deeper. You feel your emotions completely without being ruled by them. This is different from suppressing them, and it's worth being precise about the difference because a lot of people confuse the two. You can be genuinely furious in a meeting and still speak in a level, measured voice, not because you're hiding the fury, but because the fury doesn't have the final say over what happens next. You can grieve something enormous and still function, still show up, still make the phone call you need to make, because the grief is real, but it isn't driving. There's a documented psychological process called affect labeling, where simply putting precise words to an emotional state, naming exactly what you're feeling, instead of just being flooded by it, measurably reduces its intensity and gives you more room to choose your response. People who've built this skill, deliberately or by hard experience, look almost eerily composed under pressure. Not because they feel less, but because they've built a wider gap between the feeling and the reaction. Marcus Aurelius described this exact discipline, not eliminating emotion, which he considered neither possible nor desirable, but training the mind so that emotion informs judgment instead of hijacking it entirely. The reframe: your calm under pressure isn't coldness, and it isn't a mask. It's the product of having actually done the internal work most people avoid, and it shows. The action today: the next time a strong emotion hits you, pause and name it specifically, out loud or in your head, not "I'm upset," but the precise flavor of upset, and notice how much more room you suddenly have to choose what happens next. Watch how this plays out under real pressure, not the manufactured kind. Anyone can look composed during a mildly annoying delay. The test is what happens when something you actually care about is genuinely at risk: a relationship, a job, someone's health. Most people either collapse into the feeling completely, unable to function, or clamp down on it so hard they go numb, mistaking numbness for strength. What's being described here is neither. It's staying fully in contact with the fear or grief or fury, feeling every bit of it, while still being able to make the next phone call, say the next sentence, take the next necessary step. That gap between feeling and function is the actual skill, and it's built through repetition under real stakes, not theory. Sign number 8, and this is where it starts to cost you something real. You've been called intimidating, cold, or a lot by people you never actually did anything to. Maybe a coworker admitted, months into knowing you, that they were nervous to approach you at first, even though you'd never given them a single reason to be. Maybe a new partner's friends described you secondhand as intense before they'd spent real time with you at all. This thing is different from the others because it feels unfair in a way the earlier signs didn't do anything, and you're still being read as a threat. Part of what's happening is a general pattern in how people fill in gaps with minimal information. When someone can't immediately place your energy in a familiar, comfortable category, they default to caution rather than curiosity, because caution feels safer than being wrong about someone unpredictable. It's not really about you. It's about how uncertainty gets processed by people who are more comfortable with people they can quickly categorize. Seneca reminded himself that he could not control the story other people told about him before they'd even met him properly, and that trying to manage every possible misreading in advance was a project with no end and no real payoff. The reframe: being misjudged before you've spoken isn't a flaw in you. It's the tax that comes with being harder to instantly categorize, and it's a tax worth paying rather than shrinking yourself to avoid. The action today: the next time you hear you were perceived as intimidating before anyone knew you, resist the instinct to soften yourself preemptively with strangers going forward. Let them catch up. There's a cost here worth naming honestly, because this video isn't interested in pretending the 11 signs before this one are all upside. Being prejudged as intimidating means some opportunities never open, some invitations never arrive, some people write you off before you've had a chance to be anything other than a first impression. That's a real loss, and it's fair to feel it as one. But the alternative, permanently shrinking your actual presence to manage strangers' first impression comfort, trades a temporary, recoverable loss for a permanent one, because the version of you that's small enough to never intimidate anyone is also too small to ever fully show up for the people who do stick around long enough to see past it. Here's a short story worth telling here, because it makes the next few signs land differently. There's an old account of a general who, the night before a decisive battle, slept so soundly that his officers assumed something had gone terribly wrong and woke him in a panic, only to find he'd simply already made peace with every outcome the battle could produce, and saw no reason to spend the night rehearsing catastrophe he couldn't control from a tent. That's not recklessness. That's what it actually looks like when someone has stopped needing the future to reassure them before they can be at peace with the present. Keep that image in mind for what's coming next. Sign number 9. You've stopped explaining yourself. Not because you're hiding anything, and not because you've become dismissive of people who ask questions. You'll still answer a genuine question honestly. But the reflexive, Anxious over-explaining that used to follow every decision you made has quietly dropped away. You used to justify why you left the party early, why you turned down the invitation, why you changed your mind about something minor. Now you just say what's true once and let it stand. Attachment theory offers a useful lens here. People with more anxious attachment patterns often over-explain as a way of managing the fear that others will misread or abandon them if the reasoning isn't fully justified in advance, while people operating from a more secure base don't feel that same pressure to preempt every possible misunderstanding. Epictetus taught that other people's understanding of your choices was never actually your responsibility to guarantee, only your honesty in making them. The reframe: not explaining yourself isn't coldness or arrogance. It's the natural result of no longer needing everyone's approval of your reasoning before you're allowed to act on it. The action today: the next time you catch yourself over-explaining a small, harmless decision, stop mid-sentence and simply let the original statement stand. Notice how much of your day used to be built around invisible justifications nobody actually asked for. The extra sentence tacked onto "I can't make it," explaining exactly why in detail, as if the plain fact wasn't enough on its own. The paragraph-long text explaining why you didn't reply sooner, when a simple apology would have done just as well. None of those extra sentences were really for the other person. They were for the anxious part of you that needed to make sure nobody walked away thinking badly of you, even for a moment, even about something that genuinely didn't matter. Watching that reflex quiet down doesn't feel dramatic from the inside. It just feels like suddenly having a few extra sentences a day back that used to belong to managing an opinion that was never actually at risk. Sign number 10, and this is where things turn sharper. People around you sometimes try, consciously or not, to cut you down to a size that's more comfortable for them. Maybe you've noticed a friend group get subtly cooler after you achieved something you were proud of. Maybe a family member makes a joke at your expense, specifically when you're doing well, dressed up as teasing but landing like something else entirely. There's a well-known sociological pattern for exactly this tall poppy syndrome: the tendency in a group to single out and criticize individuals who stand out from the rest, cutting them down, sometimes literally, sometimes socially, until they're back at a comfortable average height. It's not personal, even though it feels intensely personal. It's a group-level reflex to protect the comfort of the average by discouraging anyone from rising too visibly above it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that other people's small cruelties toward him usually said more about the smallness of their own situation than anything true about him, and that understanding this fully removed most of the sting from it. The reframe: the people trying to shrink you aren't punishing a flaw. They're reacting to a height they haven't given themselves permission to reach yet. The action today: identify one relationship where you've been quietly shrinking yourself to keep the peace, and let yourself take up your actual size in it just once and watch what happens. This is the sign that costs the most, because unlike a stranger avoiding eye contact, the people cutting you down here are often people you actually love, the friend group you've had for a decade, the sibling who's known you since childhood, the parent who still, on some level, expects you to stay the size you were at 16. Growing past what a relationship was built to hold is one of the loneliest experiences available to a person, precisely because it doesn't come with an enemy to blame. Nobody did anything wrong, necessarily. The relationship simply wasn't built for the size you've become, and expanding into your actual dimensions inside it means either the relationship stretches to fit you or it doesn't, and there's no version of this sign that lets you find out which one it is without risking the second outcome. Sign number 11. Silence around you doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded, like something is happening even though nothing is being said. You've probably experienced this in a room full of people where you weren't speaking at all, and yet you could tell the room was still, in some sense, organized around you. Most people experience silence as a vacuum that needs filling, an awkward gap demanding a joke, a comment, anything to relieve the pressure. You've noticed that when you stay quiet, other people fill the space instead, almost compulsively, as if your silence is louder than their words. This isn't a mystical force. It's simply what happens when someone in a group is comfortable enough with stillness that they don't rush to dissolve it, while everyone else has been conditioned their whole lives to treat silence as something slightly dangerous. Seneca specifically praised the discipline of comfortable silence, noting that most people talk not because they have something worth saying, but because the quiet makes them anxious, and that a person who can hold silence without needing to escape it has already mastered something most people never do. The reframe. Your quiet isn't awkward. It's a different relationship to stillness than the one most people have been trained into, and other people can feel the difference even when they can't explain it. Watch what happens in a meeting the next time you deliberately let a question hang in the air 2 or 3 extra seconds before answering it. Most people fill that gap instinctively, worried the silence itself will be read as not knowing the answer. What actually happens almost every time is the opposite. The pause makes people lean in slightly, wait a little more attentively. Assume the extra beat means the answer is being considered carefully rather than absent. Silence, used deliberately instead of avoided anxiously, does something that filling it immediately never can. It signals that you're not afraid of the gap and the room, without being told to adjust its attention accordingly. The action today: the next time you ask a question, count 2 full seconds of silence before you answer, on purpose, and notice how differently the room responds to the pause. Sign number 12, and this is one of the costlier ones. You've stopped performing happiness to make other people comfortable. You no longer force a smile in photos you don't feel, no longer say "I'm fine" on autopilot when you're not, no longer laugh at things that aren't funny just to keep the social temperature pleasant for everyone else in the room. This has a real name in sociology: emotional labor, a term coined to describe the exhausting, often invisible work of managing your outward expressions to meet other people's expectations, regardless of what you actually feel underneath. Most people perform this labor constantly, all day, without ever registering the cost. You've started refusing to pay it in situations where it isn't actually required of you. Epictetus taught that pretending to feel what you don't feel, purely to manage someone else's comfort, was a subtle but real form of giving away your own peace for a return you never actually agreed to. The reframe: your refusal to perform emotions you don't have, isn't rudeness. It's the recovery of energy you'd been spending for years on an audience that was never entitled to it. The action today: notice one situation today where you'd normally perform an emotion you don't feel, and let your actual expression show instead, even briefly. This one tends to unsettle people who are used to you being the reliably upbeat one, and that reaction is worth expecting rather than being surprised by. People build a version of you in their heads over time, and when your actual face stops matching the version they've grown comfortable with, some of them will ask if you're okay, in a tone that means "please go back to performing the version I expect." That's not malicious most of the time. It's just what happens when you stop paying labor you'd been paying for years without anyone noticing you were paying it. The absence is more visible than the presence ever was. And here is sign number 13, the sharpest one, the one that actually explains every sign before it. You feel eerily calm in the exact moments everyone around you is starting to panic. The deadline moves up, the plan collapses, the room starts to spiral, and something in you simply doesn't join the spiral. This isn't detachment, and it isn't that you don't care about the outcome. You might care more than anyone else in the room. It's that your nervous system has stopped automatically synchronizing with the panic of the people around you. There's a well-documented phenomenon called emotional contagion, the tendency for people to unconsciously catch the emotional states of those around them, especially in groups, especially under stress, and most people are highly susceptible to it, picking up anxiety the way you'd pick up a cold. What's rare and what unsettles people the most is someone who's largely immune to catching it, who stays regulated while everyone else's nervous system is escalating around them. Marcus Aurelius spent an entire lifetime training exactly this, not the absence of concern, but the refusal to let his own inner state be dictated by the chaos happening outside of it, because he understood that panicking alongside everyone else never once made a bad situation better. The reframe: your calm in a crisis isn't a lack of investment, it's the single clearest, least deniable evidence of everything the previous 12 signs were pointing toward, that your baseline state simply doesn't need the room's permission to stay steady. The action today: The next time you notice panic starting to spread through a group you're in, don't join it and don't try to talk anyone else out of it. Either just stay where you are, visibly steady, and let your regulation be the only argument you make. And here's the paradox I promised you at the very start. The reason so many people who want this quality accidentally destroy it while chasing it. The moment you try to prove any of these 13 signs, the moment you perform stillness to look powerful, or manufacture calm to be noticed, or stage your silence for effect, the entire thing collapses instantly. Because the one thing that made it real in the first place was that it never needed an audience to confirm it. An aura you're actively trying to project is definitionally a performance, and performances require energy, attention, and an audience's approval to sustain themselves, which means they're exhausting in exactly the way real self-possession isn't. This is the backfire. People buy the confident posture, the crystals, the manifestation rituals, the carefully engineered mysterious silence, and it reads as exactly what it is: effort, not ease, because the entire premise, the actual mechanism behind every sign on this list, is the absence of needing anyone's reaction at all. You cannot perform not needing approval. The instant you're performing it for approval, it's gone. The only way through is the one nobody wants to hear, because it can't be shortcut, staged, or purchased. You have to actually stop needing the room, not just look like you've stopped. Think about how obvious this becomes once you've seen it a few times. The person at the party working hardest to seem unbothered is always unmistakably the most bothered person there. You can feel the effort radiating off them before they've said a word. And effort is the one thing that instantly gives away that the whole display was manufactured for an audience. Meanwhile, the person who genuinely doesn't need the room rarely even registers as trying to have an aura at all. They just seem like themselves, slightly more solid than everyone around them, and it's only afterward, on the drive home, that you find yourself still thinking about them for reasons you can't quite name. That's the tell. The real version doesn't ask to be remembered, it just is. Picture what it actually feels like to live inside this fully, day to day, not as a performance but as your baseline. You walk into rooms and you don't scan for approval anymore, you just arrive. You speak and you don't watch people's faces for permission to keep speaking. You disagree and you let the disagreement exist without needing to resolve it in your favor. You sit in silence at a dinner table and you don't feel the old itch to fill it. Someone criticizes you unfairly and it passes through you instead of lodging somewhere and staying for a week. You achieve something and you feel the satisfaction fully, privately, complete on its own, without needing anyone to confirm it happened. You notice too how much quieter your internal narration has become. You used to run a constant background commentary on how you are being perceived in almost every interaction. Did that land right? Did I sound stupid? Do they like me? Most of that commentary has simply gone silent, not because you stopped caring about people, but because you stopped needing their read on you to know who you are in the room. The energy that used to go into that commentary is just available now for the actual conversation, the actual moment, the actual person in front of you, instead of the imagined jury watching from the sidelines. The world around you doesn't get quieter, people still misread. Some rooms still cool slightly when you walk in. Some people will still try to cut you down to a size that suits them. That doesn't go away. What changes is that none of it reaches the part of you that used to need it to go a certain way. You feel the weather. You're just no longer standing in it unprotected. For the next 7 days, run one simple audit. Go back through these 13 signs and be honest about which ones are already true of you and which ones you are still performing instead of actually living. You don't need all 13 to be real. Most people who read as genuinely powerful in a room are only fully living 4 or 5 of them. The rest come later, slowly, the same way the first ones did. Pick the one sign on this list that stung the most as you heard it. The one where some part of you thought, that's not me yet, but I want it to be. That's not a coincidence. That's usually the exact sign your own growth is standing right next to. Close enough to recognize, not close enough to claim yet. Start there. Not with all 13 at once, with the one that mattered most when you heard it. The whole video comes down to one line worth remembering. You don't have a powerful aura because you try to have one. You have one the moment you stop needing anyone in the room to notice. Comment the word steady below if you recognized more of these 13 signs in yourself than you expected to. It tells me exactly how many of you are ready for the deeper version of this, and it puts you in front of it first. If this changed how you think about your own presence, subscribe, because this channel exists to hand you the quiet, unglamorous tools that actually build the thing everyone else is trying to fake. Thank you for staying to the end. Stay steady.